The strange paradox of rejoicing is this: the more frantically we pursue happiness, the more completely it evades us. Those occasions we've set aside as special birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, have morphed into elaborate stages where we act out happiness rather than genuinely experience it. Meanwhile, a remarkable thing occurs for those who awaken. They realize that what we are desperately attempting to create through our rituals has been here all along, concealed in plain sight. The cosmic jest is that we've been seeking the extraordinary in appointed occasions while overlooking the sheer miracle that existence is. This is why those who've glimpsed a profound reality often step away from our cultural customs, not because they found less to celebrate, but because they've discovered that everything, without exception, is already a celebration. And once you've tasted the essence of presence, the ornate vessels we've constructed to contain it suddenly seem superfluous. What I'm about to share isn't merely philosophical. It's an invitation to acknowledge what your deepest self already understands, that joy doesn't arrive on scheduled days. It emerges when we stop waiting for it to commence. Let's begin with this curious way we've segmented time. We've created this odd division where some moments are special and others are merely, transit between special moments. The awakened consciousness finds this utterly intriguing. You see, we declare, this is a celebration. And by doing so, we subtly suggest that the rest of life is not a celebration. What an extraordinary pact we've made with ourselves. I shall be fully alive, present, and joyful on these specific dates. But the remaining thousands of hours are just ordinary living. It's as if we've decided that the symphony only occurs during the crescendos, and the rest is simply accompaniment. But the spiritually aware person begins to sense the ridiculousness in this fragmentation. They start to wonder, why am I holding back my capacity for joy for these arbitrary moments on the calendar? Consider a birthday. What is it, truly? It's an astronomical phenomenon. The Earth has finished another orbit around the sun since you emerged from your mother. But is that revolution finished only on that specific date? Or is it a perpetual process where every moment is equally significant? In the vast cosmic dance, the awakened mind sees through this game of designated special moments. It recognizes that by elevating certain days, certain hours, as celebrations, we've unintentionally demoted all other moments to something lesser. And this is the primary source of aversion, the recognition that celebration, as we've institutionalized it, actually reduces life rather than amplifying it. You see, as you begin to awaken, you start to perceive that the extraordinary is nestled within the ordinary all along. The bird's call on a Tuesday morning becomes as profound as the wedding chimes on Saturday. The vapor rising from your tea is as deserving of attention as the birthday candles. And so the line between celebration and non-celebration begins to appear as arbitrary as sketching lines in water. But here's where it becomes truly captivating. The spiritually awakened person doesn't reject happiness. Quite the contrary. They are discovering a more pervasive, constant joy that needs no special occasions to manifest. And once you've experienced that, once you've sensed the celebration inherent in every inhalation, the manufactured nature of our calendrical festivities becomes transparent. It's like someone offering you a plastic fruit after you've tasted the authentic one. There's no animosity toward the plastic fruit, simply a gentle acknowledgement that it's no longer necessary, and perhaps a quiet perplexity at those still convinced of its nutritional value. Now, let's delve into something even more peculiar. The way we've commercialized our celebration. Have you noticed how our rites of joy have become rites of consumption? This is not by chance. The awakened mind observes with curiosity how we've somehow equated spending with feeling. It's a special day. Therefore, I must acquire special items. What an extraordinary logical leap. As if joy were something that could be purchased in a shop, wrapped in paper, and presented with a ribbon. Consider the Christmas frenzy, that panicked December rush. People hurrying about, credit cards heating up in their wallets. Faces strained with the pressure of mandatory merriment. I must find the perfect present. I must prepare the perfect feast. I must create the perfect moment. But perfection, as we define it, is the enemy of presence. And without presence, what is a celebration but an elaborate performance? The spiritually sensitive person begins to perceive this commercial celebration complex as a form of hypnosis. They notice how we've been convinced that joy necessitates accessories, that connection demands catalysts, that love must be demonstrated through acquisition. And it's not that they've grown cynical, it's that they've attained clear sight. They've begun to distinguish between the menu and the meal, between the map and the territory, between the commercial promotion for joy and joy itself. There's a wonderful Zen anecdote about a master who, upon attaining enlightenment, was asked how his life had changed. He responded, "Before enlightenment, I chopped wood and carried water. After enlightenment, I chopped wood and carried water. The distinction wasn't in the actions, but in the quality of presence brought to them." Similarly, the awakened person doesn't require designated moments of consumption to experience celebration. They've discovered that life itself, chopping wood, carrying water, is the celebration. And when you've realized that the elaborate commercial apparatus surrounding holidays appears as a curious relic of our collective amnesia, it's like watching people frantically searching for their spectacles while they're resting on their head. There is no judgment in this observation, only a gentle astonishment at how we've created such complication around something so intrinsically simple as joy. And here is the delicious irony. The person who has awakened to the celebration inherent in ordinary moments is not opposed to gifts or feasts or gatherings. They simply no longer mistake these things for the celebration itself. They can participate without attachment, enjoy without dependency, and when the moment requires it, walk away without loss. There's another peculiar dimension to our celebration customs that the awakened mind finds especially fascinating: the way we've confined ourselves in this peculiar loop of anticipation. It's truly quite an ingenious prison we've constructed for ourselves. Reflect on it. We spend weeks, sometimes months, looking forward to a celebration. When Christmas arrives, then I'll feel that special happiness. When my birthday comes, then I'll feel genuinely valued. When the new year begins, then I'll feel that fresh start. But what are we actually doing here? We are consigning joy to the future. We're scheduling happiness as if it were a dental appointment. And in doing so, we are subtly communicating to ourselves that the present moment, the only moment that has ever existed or will ever exist, is somehow inadequate. The spiritually awakened person has started to perceive this trap. They've begun to recognize that anticipation is a form of absence, a method of not being here. And they've perhaps realized through their own direct experience that joy isn't something awaiting us in the future. It's what's accessible when we stop waiting entirely. But it becomes even more compelling because after the anticipation comes the inevitable letdown. How many times have you heard someone say, "It just didn't live up to my expectations"? The birthday that somehow failed to deliver, the New Year's Eve that somehow felt lackluster, the vacation that didn't rejuvenate as promised. This isn't because celebrations are intrinsically disappointing. It's because no external event can possibly rival the perfect version we've engineered in our anticipation. Reality, with all its beautiful imperfections, can never compete with the airbrushed fantasy of expectation. And then what occurs? We instantly begin anticipating the next celebration. Well, this Christmas wasn't perfect, but next Christmas will be different. And so the cycle persists. Anticipation, disappointment, more anticipation, a perpetual motion, device of dissatisfaction, cleverly disguised as cultural ritual. The awakened person has stepped off this treadmill not because they are averse to happiness, but because they've discovered a more direct route to it. The present moment, unadorned by expectation, unclouded by comparison. They've found that when you cease anticipating special moments, every moment has the capacity to be special in its own unique manner. It's like the difference between observing the ocean through a series of photographs versus actually standing on the shoreline. The celebration-dependent mind collects snapshots of happiness. The awakened mind swims in the living water. Now let's investigate what the awakened mind discovers in lieu of our designated celebration, what I term the authentic present. You see, as one awakens spiritually, a fascinating reversal takes place. Instead of pursuing the extraordinary and special occasions, They start to discover the extraordinary in what everyone else dismisses as ordinary. And this transformation is absolutely revolutionary. Consider a simple cup of tea. The unawakened mind quickly consumes it without noticing, already preoccupied with the next task, the next moment, the next experience. But the awakened mind might find an entire cosmos in that cup. The dance of the steam, the subtle shifts in flavor as it cools, the warmth of the mug against the skin, the miraculous convergence of sun and soil and rain and human effort that made this simple moment possible. This isn't mere poetic license. It is literally what begins to occur as awareness deepens. The ordinary is revealed as the miraculous in disguise. And when you've experienced the profound depth available in a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the manufactured intensity of New Year's Eve can feel like a crude imitation of celebration. Let me propose something radical. What we call spiritual awakening might actually be the recovery of our capacity for genuine fascination. Children possess this naturally. Have you observed they can be mesmerized by a caterpillar crawling across the pavement, completely absorbed in the present miracle? We label this childlike wonder, but perhaps it's not childlike at all. Perhaps it's simply human. And what we've done as adults is fall asleep to the continuous miracle that envelops us. The awakened person is simply someone who has remembered how to be fascinated without an occasion. They've reclaimed their birthright of direct experience, unfiltered by expectation, unmuted by familiarity. And here is the truly delightful irony. In reclaiming this capacity for everyday wonder, they've discovered a celebration that makes our scheduled festivities appear dull by comparison. They've stumbled upon the secret that our designated celebrations are actually trying to remind us of, but frequently fail to deliver, that being fully alive, fully present, is itself the ultimate celebration. This isn't to say that they never participate in birthdays or holidays. They might, but they bring to these occasions the same quality of presence they bring to washing dishes or watching clouds, and in doing so, they transform these celebrations from rehearsed social rituals back into authentic expressions of the joy already accessible in each moment. The authentic present isn't opposed to celebration. It reveals that all of life is an ongoing celebration for those with eyes to perceive and the presence to engage. It's not about rejecting special occasions. It's about recognizing that no occasion is ordinary when approached with full awareness. Now we turn to perhaps the most uncomfortable dimension of our celebration customs, what I call the social performance. And this, I suspect, is where the spiritually awakened person senses the greatest detachment. Have you ever observed the peculiar set of social expectations that orbit our celebrations? The unspoken rules about how excited one should appear, how grateful you should be, how much you should eat or drink or laugh. There's an entire choreography to these events that we are all expected to adhere to, isn't there? The birthday person must feign surprise at the party, even if they were aware of it. The Christmas morning child must exhibit sufficient enthusiasm for each gift, irrespective of their genuine feelings. The New Year's Eve reveler must project optimism about the year ahead, whatever their private uncertainties. The wedding guest must congratulate the couple with unalloyed enthusiasm, setting aside any reservations. It's a curious theater we've established, full of should emotions and must behaviors. And as one awakens spiritually, this theater becomes increasingly transparent. The awakened person has begun to prioritize authenticity over social conformity, not in a manner that is intentionally disruptive or unkind, but in a way that gently resists emotional pretense. They've started to recognize how exhausting it is to maintain these performances, how draining it is to manufacture feelings on demand. And they've perhaps realized something else. That true connection happens in moments of genuine presence, not in moments of synchronized social performance. The real intimacy, the real communion they seek, isn't found in the ritual exchange of gifts or in the coordinated toast, but in those unscripted moments when people cease the performance and simply are. Think of those times when a holiday gathering shifts, when the formal meal concludes and people linger in the kitchen, when the structured gift opening yields to authentic conversation, when the scheduled activities end and spontaneous connection commences. These are often the moments we cherish most, aren't they? the moments when celebration becomes genuine rather than enacted. The spiritually awakened person isn't opposed to gathering or sharing happiness. They are opposed to the emotional labor of pretending, the exhaustion of managing how they appear rather than simply being as they are. I'm reminded of something D.H. Lawrence once noted: the human being is a most curious creature. He thinks he has got one soul and he has got dozens. In our celebrations, we are often asked to present just one of those souls, the grateful soul, the excited soul, the nostalgic soul, while the others must remain concealed. But the awakened person has begun to value the integration of all their souls, the wholeness of their being. And this integration feels more vital than the fragmentation required by social performance. Now, let's explore another fascinating aspect of our celebration customs that frequently concerns the awakening mind, what I call the tyranny of tradition. Isn't it peculiar how much of our celebration behavior is dictated not by our current desires, but by the patterns of the past? This is how we've always celebrated Christmas. This is what we always do for birthdays. This is our family tradition. These phrases are invoked with such deep respect, aren't they? As if the repetition of a pattern over time somehow imbues it with inherent worth. But the awakened mind has begun to challenge this assumption. They've started to wonder whether tradition serves consciousness or whether consciousness has become subjugated to tradition. You see, tradition can be a beautiful thing, a means of connecting across time, of maintaining cultural continuity, of honoring what came before. But it can also become a kind of prison, a set of behaviors we execute, not because they bring us joy or meaning now, but simply because we've always executed them. The spiritually sensitive person isn't against the past. They simply prefer not to be governed by it. They are interested in what's alive in this moment, what's authentic now, what serves the present expression of consciousness, and sometimes that necessitates gently setting aside the patterns of the past to create room for the emergence of the new. Consider how many of our celebration traditions were established in entirely different social contexts. The enormous Christmas feast that made sense for agricultural communities experiencing genuine winter scarcity, the elaborate wedding ceremonies that functioned as economic and political alliances between families, the gift exchanges that once represented significant personal sacrifice in times of limited material abundance. Yet we continue these patterns in our age of abundance, often without questioning whether they still serve their original purpose. The awakened person has begun to notice this discrepancy, the way we often preserve the form of traditional celebrations while having lost touch with their essence. And there's something else they've noticed: how tradition often becomes a substitute for present creativity. This is how we've always done it, can become a convenient way of avoiding the more challenging question: what would be most alive, most meaningful, most authentic for us to do now? The truly awakened mind isn't hostile to the past. It simply isn't constrained by it. It remains receptive to the wisdom of tradition while reserving the freedom to respond freshly to the present moment. This isn't rebellion for its own sake. It's the natural expression of a consciousness that values aliveness over repetition, authenticity over conformity. And perhaps this is why the spiritually awakened often find themselves uncomfortable at traditional celebrations. Not because they oppose joy or connection, but because they sense how these scripted events can obstruct the very spontaneity and presence they purport to celebrate. Like attempting to capture a butterfly by pinning it under glass, our efforts to preserve celebration through rigid tradition often end up extinguishing the very thing we sought to honor. Now we come to something rather extraordinary, what I call the joy beyond joy. And this, I believe, is at the core of why spiritually awakened people often appear to have an aversion to conventional celebrations. You see, as consciousness expands, something remarkable happens to one's experience of emotion. The familiar emotions, happiness, excitement, anticipation, don't vanish, but they are accompanied by something else, something both subtler and more profound. It's a kind of background hum of well-being that isn't reliant on circumstances. The unawakened person seeks happiness, a reactive state dependent on external conditions being precisely right. I obtained what I desired, therefore I feel happy. But the awakened person has begun to discover joy, a state that arises not in response to conditions, but from contact with being itself. This joy needs no justification. It doesn't require the perfect presence or the perfect meal or the ideal company. It emerges naturally when the mind is present, when awareness is clear, when one is in direct contact with the miracle of existence. And compared to this fundamental joy, the happiness pursued through conventional celebration can feel surprisingly superficial. It's like the difference between a candle and the sun. If you've only ever known candlelight, you'll cherish your candle, shield it from the breeze, feel bereft when it goes out. But once you've experienced sunlight, your relationship with the candle naturally transforms. Not because you're opposed to candlelight, but because you no longer depend on it for illumination. Similarly, the awakened person doesn't reject celebration because they are against happiness. They've simply discovered a more dependable, more fundamental source of joy that makes the manufactured happiness of designated celebration seem like an unnecessary complication. There's a wonderful anecdote about the Zen master Ryokan, who returned to his hut one evening to find it had been robbed of the few possessions he owned. He sat down and wrote a poem. The thief left it behind, the moon at the window. This is the joy beyond joy, the recognition that what's most precious can't be given or taken away, that beneath the temporary elations and disappointments of conventional experience lies a wellspring of well-being that's always available to the present heart. And so when the spiritually awakened person seems detached from the customary markers of celebration, it isn't because they've become joyless, quite the opposite. It's because they've discovered a joy so fundamental, so unconditional, that the conditional joys offered by our celebration customs can feel like an unnecessary detour from what's already here. It's like offering a glass of water to someone already immersed in a clear lake. The offer isn't unwelcome, it's simply redundant, and perhaps this is the most beautiful realization of spiritual awakening. Not that celebration is wrong, but that all of existence is already a celebration for those with eyes to see it. This brings us to what I find to be one of the most misunderstood aspects of spiritual awakening, the inclination towards simplicity and withdrawal that often accompanies it. From an external perspective, this can appear like antisocial behavior, like a rejection of life's pleasures, like an aversion to joy. But from an internal perspective, it's experienced as something quite different, what I call the quiet revolution. As one awakens spiritually, there's often a natural shedding of complexity, a spontaneous movement toward what's essential. This isn't driven by moral judgment or aesthetic discipline. It's simply that as awareness deepens, one becomes naturally drawn to what's real and naturally disinterested in what's not. And many of our celebration customs, with their elaborate preparations and social performances, their commercialized exchanges and choreographed emotions, begin to feel unnecessarily complex compared to the simple miracle of being. Think of how a cluttered room affects your state of mind compared to a clean, simple space. The awakened consciousness naturally favors the uncluttered space, not because it's opposed to furniture, but because it values the clarity and peace that simplicity enables. Similarly, the spiritually sensitive person often prefers the simple gathering to the elaborate party, the quiet meal to the formal banquet, the genuine exchange to the ritualized performance. There's a story about the Buddha encountering a group of ascetics who practiced extreme self-denial. He asked them why they engaged in such harsh practices, and they replied that they were doing so to attain liberation. The Buddha then asked them if their ascetic practices had led to liberation, and they had to concede they hadn't. The Buddha then shared his own discovery that liberation comes not from indulgence nor from denial, but from the middle way of wise discernment. Similarly, the awakened person's movement towards simplicity isn't about denying joy. It's about discerning between real nourishment and empty calories, between what genuinely feeds the spirit and what merely distracts it. And this discernment often guides them away from the more extravagant forms of celebration toward simpler, more direct expressions of joy and connection. But there's something else happening in this quiet revolution. a shift in priorities from the collective to the authentic. Our celebration customs are largely collective creations, standardized ways of marking time and sharing experience. But spiritual awakening is profoundly personal, a unique unfolding of consciousness that doesn't always align with collective patterns. The awakened person has begun to trust their own experience, to follow the subtle guidance of their own awareness, even when it deviates from the well-trodden paths of social convention. This isn't selfishness, it's authenticity. It's the recognition that true giving, true connection, true celebration can only occur from a place of genuine presence, not from adherence to external expectation. And so what appears to be withdrawal is often actually a deeper engagement, not with the superficial rituals of celebration, but with the living reality those rituals were intended to honor, not with a form of tradition, but with its essence, not with the appearance of connection, but with its substance. Now we reach what might be the most profound shift in perspective that accompanies spiritual awakening, the discovery of what I call the cosmic dance. And this discovery transforms not just one's relationship to celebration, but to the entire tapestry of existence. You see, from the conventional viewpoint, life is a sequence of separate events happening to a separate individual. Some of these events are categorized as good and thus worthy of celebration, while others are categorized as bad and thus cause for concern. And so we develop this habit of moving through life selectively, embracing some moments while rejecting others, celebrating what we prefer while enduring what we don't. But as awakening deepens, this fragmented perception begins to dissolve. One starts to sense that what appeared to be separate events are actually facets of a single, seamless unfolding. What seemed to be happening to a separate self is actually happening as the self. The boundary between observer and observed, between self and world, becomes increasingly permeable. And in this transparency, something remarkable occurs. One begins to sense the inherent perfection of the entire dance. Not perfection in the sense of meeting my personal preferences, but perfection in the sense of exactly what is happening, in exactly the way it's happening. The bird's call, the car's horn, the laughter, the tears, the birth, the death, all of it revealing itself as a single, unified expression of the cosmos coming to know itself. In Hinduism, there's a beautiful image of Shiva Nataraja, the Lord of the Dance, whose cosmic dance creates, sustains, and dissolves the universe. The spiritually awakened person has begun to sense this dance directly, to recognize that every moment, pleasant or unpleasant, celebratory or ordinary, is a step in this divine choreography. And from this perspective, our custom of designating certain moments as worthy of celebration, while ignoring the miraculous nature of all other moments, begins to seem like an arbitrary fragmentation of what is, in reality, a seamless whole. It's as if we've decided that certain notes in a symphony deserve our applause, while others are merely background, not recognizing that it's the relationship between all the notes that creates the music. The awakened person hasn't become averse to moments of heightened joy or collective acknowledgement. They've simply recognized that the distinction between special moments and ordinary moments is a conceptual layer rather than an inherent reality. They've begun to sense the extraordinary that lies concealed within the ordinary, the sacred that permeates the mundane. And this recognition naturally transforms their relationship to conventional celebration. Not because they're against joy, but because they've discovered a more inclusive joy that doesn't exclude any aspect of experience. Not because they've become indifferent to the significant transitions in life, but because they've begun to sense the significance inherent in each breath, each heartbeat, each moment of awareness. In the cosmic dance, every moment is both utterly unique and completely united with all other moments. Every experience is both absolutely personal and completely universal. And in this paradoxical totality, the awakened person finds a celebration that never begins because it never ends. The eternal festival of existence itself. And so we arrive at the final and perhaps most beautiful twist in this exploration, what I call the paradoxical return. Because something fascinating happens as awakening continues to deepen and expand. after seeing through the arbitrary nature of designated celebrations, after recognizing the performative aspects of social ritual, after discovering the joy that doesn't depend on special occasions, the awakened person often finds themselves able to participate in these very celebrations with a newfound freedom and authenticity. It's a bit like learning to swim. Initially, you cling to the pool's edge, afraid to let go. Then, as you develop confidence, you venture into the deep end, discovering your ability to remain afloat without support. And eventually, having mastered swimming, you may return to the shallow end, not because you require it, but because you are free to enjoy every part of the pool. Similarly, the deeply awakened person might circle back to the very celebrations they once felt distant from, but they return differently, not as someone frantically seeking joy in designated moments, but as someone bringing their already present joy to these occasions. Not as someone who needs the ritual to feel whole, but as someone who can appreciate the ritual as one of innumerable expressions of the wholeness that already is. There is a wonderful Zen maxim: before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The actions look identical externally, but the inner relationship to them has been profoundly altered. Similarly, before awakening, one might participate in celebrations out of social expectation, emotional reliance, or unexamined custom. After awakening, one might still participate, but from a place of liberty, presence, and deliberate choice. The visible conduct might appear the same, but the internal experience has been revolutionized. And here is where it becomes truly intriguing, because the awakened person who chooses to participate in celebration often brings a quality of presence that transforms the entire event. Their genuine pleasure, unburdened by need or performance, creates a space where others can momentarily drop their own social facades. Their attentive listening, unperturbed by anticipation or judgment, allows for authentic connection to surface. Their natural joy, independent of specific conditions, becomes contagious without being imposed. I am reminded of the great Zen master Ikkyu, who was known to frequent the brothels and taverns of medieval Japan. When criticized by more conservative monks, he responded, "What is holier, the place where people pretend to be holy, or the place where they admit they are not?" His presence in these unholy places wasn't about self-indulgence. It was about bringing awareness and compassion to every realm of human experience. Similarly, the deeply awakened person doesn't need to evade conventional celebrations to maintain their clarity. They are free to participate or not, as the moment dictates. But whether they attend the party or spend the evening in solitude, they do so from a place of choice rather than compulsion, authenticity rather than conformity. And perhaps this is the greatest gift of spiritual awakening. Not an escape from the world of form and convention, but a newfound freedom within it. Not a rejection of human connection and commemoration, but a deeper capacity to engage with these aspects of life from a place of genuine presence. Not the termination of celebration, but the discovery that all of existence is a celebration for the heart that is fully awake to it. So you see, when we observe a spiritually awakened person appearing to withdraw from celebration, what we are witnessing isn't a rejection of happiness. It's a transformation in how happiness is experienced and expressed. It's not that they've become less capable of celebration, it's that they've discovered what our celebrations are actually pointing toward. The birthday pastry, the wedding toast, the holiday gathering, these are all attempts to fabricate islands of presence and connection in a vast ocean of distraction and separation. But the awakened person has begun to recognize that the presence and connection we pursue through celebration is actually available in every moment. And this realization doesn't diminish life. It enhances it immeasurably. Because when you no longer need special occasions to fully arrive in your life, every occasion becomes special in its own incomparable way. When you no longer require designated moments of joy, joy becomes your perpetual companion. When you no longer depend on calendar-marked transitions to acknowledge the passage of time, each moment reveals itself as a birth, a death, and a renewal all at once. So the next time you observe someone quietly stepping back from the party, someone whose enthusiasm for celebration seems muted compared to others. Entertain this possibility. Perhaps what you're witnessing isn't an absence of joy, but a presence so complete that it doesn't require special circumstances to manifest. And perhaps in their quiet contentment, they're extending an invitation not to abandon celebration, but to discover what lies beyond and beneath it. Not to reject the heightened moments of life, but to recognize the height that's accessible in every moment. Not to separate from the human community, but to join it more fully through the simple miracle of being present. For in the end, the awakened heart doesn't celebrate less, it celebrates endlessly. Not through designated occasions, but through the continuous recognition that existence itself is the ultimate celebration, and that each of us is both the celebrated and the celebrant in this timeless festival of being. And that, my friends, is a party that never has to end.